Welcome to the Relocated South African, the show for navigating immigration from South Africa for a better future. I'm your host, Jan Hugo, from Lagos, Portugal. Now, to date, we've interviewed South Africans who have immigrated to many different locations: Australia, Ireland, Dubai, Portugal, and today we're joined by Margaux and Dian all the way from Massachusetts in America. Welcome, Margaux and Dian.
Thank you so much. It's lovely being here.
Yeah.
Great to have you on the show. And I have to say, we've all heard of Boston and Providence in Massachusetts, but I believe you're living in a different county. Can you tell us where you are?
So we are based in Cape Cod, or on Cape Cod. So we're in the Cape, but not the one in South Africa. And it's literally this stretch and arm of land that goes into the water towards the bottom of Massachusetts. So absolutely beautiful piece of land and very well known for the summer vacation haven of some of the rich and famous as well. So if you think of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, those are the two islands that are close to Cape Cod that you kind of jump on the ferry from here. So it will remind you of Nassau, those kind of places. It's absolutely beautiful.
Okay, there was a recent series on Netflix.
Correct, yes.
Correct.
With Nicole Kidman.
Correct.
It's The Perfect Couple.
That's right. That was in Nantucket. That's absolutely right. Okay. So you are originally from Joburg. So tell us about your journey to get to Cape Cod today.
Well, I mean, Jan, we, as you said, we grew up in Johannesburg and we're unbelievably happy to be South Africans and to be in South Africa. Margaux and I met when we were 8 years old, and throughout life came in and out of one another's life, and then got married when, I think in 2016, where we then moved to Pretoria and we spent most of our time there. I think the big shift for us came during COVID. COVID obviously was an interesting time in South Africa. And, I think there was a lot of uncertainty, not just about, how we were handling COVID, but also what the country's going to look like, following COVID. And for us, where we had been thinking about, maybe looking to immigrate, and we just weren't sure how that would look, where to go. With us, we were lucky enough to get two beautiful twins, a boy and a girl, Benjamin and Nina. And that kind of changes your 5 and 20-year outlook. You stop thinking short term and all of a sudden you have to think, what does it look like in 20 years? And I think that was the big thing for us. Was we had COVID, there was so much uncertainty, and we decided then and there, let's actively start looking outside, right? And I think initially we were quite open to wherever. We looked at the UK, we looked at Australia. For me, a big thing initially was, being able to teach Ben how to play rugby. So that was a big thing, to find a country that, I've got some sort of knowledge of the sports. And so we looked all around. And I think one of the big things that kind of pushed us in the direction was, Margaux, with her professional background, is from banking, so very traditional corporate background. So being able to find work in a industry or in a position that makes sense for her would have been substantially easier, where I'm much more of an entrepreneur without a lot of corporate experience. And what I found when I was starting to look for work was I struggled to find anything that would put me in a position where I would be able to provide for my family in the same way that I did, in South Africa. And I think the big thing for me was, to be as crude as possible. Like I didn't want to go and be poor in another country. That was a big thing for me, right? So after, speaking to a bunch of my friends, MBA in a foreign country started becoming a way for us to pivot into a country in a way that it kind of gives us a clean slate, in a way for us to get into a company or a position in a different country, at a level where we would be able to be comfortable. And so we decided to pursue an MBA at ESA Business School in Barcelona, which is the last year it was ranked the 3rd best MBA in the world. And we just used that as a way for us to, initially we wanted to go to the Netherlands. And so we wanted to use the MBA as a way to get into Europe. And so that's more or less the way we got out, if I can call it that.
Was through study. So you got a study visa to go to Barcelona.
Correct.
Okay. And how long did that last?
the program was 18 months. And then, I think there was a bit of time afterwards and a bit of time before that we just, stayed to wrap things up or to get settled. So it was about 20 months. After the MBA finished, I was lucky enough, to have a job secured in the USA before my studies finished. That is obviously different for a lot of people, where, especially at the moment in Europe, with the job markets being, what it is, it's not always the case. So we initially wanted to stay in Europe, but during my studies, the Ukraine-Russia war broke out, and it really did create havoc in a lot of companies. It was also post-COVID. Post-COVID, a lot of big companies hired, way too many people because we had that uptick after that, and so they just hired so many people. And then when our graduation year came through, they were just overstocked. So lucky enough for us, I was given a position at a private equity firm in Portland, Maine, in the USA. So we then, after Spain, went back home to South Africa for 2 months just to kind of visit grandma and grandpa and eat enough biltong to last us for a good amount of time. And then we left for the US. Strangely, we hadn't been to the US. I think the first time we stepped on US soil was the day that we immigrated here.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
We just rocked up, and yeah, that's history.
Okay, let's just step back. So this all happened COVID was March 2020. So when did you actually leave for Barcelona?
September 2021.
Okay. Yeah, we left October 2020. We were on the first non-repatriation flight. Yeah. So Europe versus America, that's probably a podcast on its own, but let's just have a quick chat about what was your experience of Barcelona like? I mean, it's a beautiful city, wonderful to visit. I always say it's different to visit than to live. So was that your experience?
I think one of the key things for me was the fact that depending on your life stage, things look and feel a lot different. So had Dian and I done Barcelona before we had the twins, I think our experience would have been fundamentally different. One, we would have had more cash to spend, because I think if you step into something like an MBA program as your route into immigration, there's a lot of things that come with that. For example, the social life of an MBA and going, like it's the going out, they go on ski trips and we weren't in a position financially that we were able to do those kind of things. But I think one of the biggest important things that we always held on to speak to Simon Sinek, is we knew our why. Our why was to create a better future for ourselves and for our children in the long run, and get out of South Africa. So whenever those feelings kind of bubbled up of, oh, we can't do all the fun stuff and we don't have all this free cash flow, we would just go like, we would know our why, and that's what we stuck to. I definitely, for example, think living in Barcelona as a student is an absolute party, and it's a wonderful place. And even as a tourist, it's incredible because there is so much to do. Living there as a young family, for example, and this is something that I think a lot of South Africans might feel uncomfortable with initially, and you don't think of it beforehand. We're used to large open spaces, large backyards where our children can play, even though it might be fenced in. We moved to a city where we stayed on the 5th floor of an apartment block. We had no access to the outdoor. Barcelona is very building-like. It's just buildings in winter, right? There's nothing green. Yeah. Parks don't have grass. That to me was really tricky, like stepping out of our front door essentially into a very busy road with 2 young children took quite a bit of getting used to the extent that I can tell you now that I would never in my life live in a city again like that, because it's just not what we are accustomed to as South Africans. So there are small things that definitely took some getting used to, but it was a wonderful experience. And the kids remember Barcelona quite fondly. They loved it there. It's not a time that I would take back. We learned an incredible amount, but it's not a place that I would live in with young children, for example. As a young couple, new in the workforce, might be a completely different story.
I mean, that played a big role in ultimately deciding where we wanted to go. So the space thing was much bigger than I initially thought. Like, it's something that I think, when we spoke about this to some of our European friends, they were dumbfounded because that's all they're used to, right? They grow up in a flat. They make it work because they don't know anything different. So, when we looked at the Netherlands versus, the US, to a large extent, it played a role where we said, look, if we're going to Amsterdam or Rotterdam, we're probably going to be staying in either a small flat or the chances of us having a garden or a place where we can have our dogs run around is going to be quite small. And even if we want that, it's going to take a substantial amount of time for us to become, rich enough or well off enough to be able to afford that. Whereas in the US, like, it's very similar to what we used to. Like, you have wide open spaces in forested areas, and you have a yard. Almost everybody has a yard. You have a culture of, like, we are used to braaiing on a Sunday or braaiing on a Saturday. You've got a culture that's used to that, spending time in the backyard, having a pool, inviting people over. So that played quite a big role for us. Other than that, I mean, Europe in general, when you look at any of the cities in Europe, it's awesome from an infrastructure point of view. It was great. Everything worked. We had buses and trains, and I bought a small scooter. It was amazing in that regard, and that's obviously something we kind of miss. But in general, like, Barcelona was a much better place to visit than it is to live, because you would think that, just thinking about the language barrier, like, you would think that it's an international, one of the top 10 most visited cities in the world. And you would think that there's a ton of people speaking English. It's not the case, right? When you live there and you need to go to the municipality to get residency cards or, a telephone bill, whatever the case, if you have to phone your cell phone provider to try and figure out, why you don't have internet, right? Finding an English representative is a headache, right? I was lucky enough to have friends, that were studying with me that were Spanish. And I just used to say, here's a phone, please speak to these guys and explain to me. So it's a big thing, especially in Southern Europe.
I mean, I can so relate to what you're talking about. I'm fortunate that I can speak French. So the time we lived in France, I managed to practice my French in the bank and on the phone and with people like that. But it is extremely difficult. And I think a lot of people have this perception that, we're going to immigrate, when things go bad in South Africa, we'll go there. Just don't understand the red tape involved in setting up, and you don't have an address, and you don't have this, and to get a bank account, buy a car, it's a freaking nightmare. And the thing about high rises, again, that's what drove us to Portugal. We were in Monaco for a best part of 2 years, and in a high rise with that noise, in the mornings, I still sit here after 2 years, and I drink my coffee on the veranda, and we've got farmland in front of us, and I just listen to the silence. So it's a huge thing. So I think a lot of people don't appreciate it. And it's very interesting when you talk to people that I have in Australia, for instance. South Africans look for that lifestyle, and they want to braai, and they want to be outside, and kids want to live outside and play outside. So I think very, very important. It's great to hear. Just a question you were talking about. You were obviously on the same page when you decided to go. It wasn't a thing of just one of you or both of you.
No, it was absolutely a family decision. Like I said, we knew our why and what we wanted to achieve. And to this day, when things get tough, we're like, okay, there's an end goal. We know why we did this. Going back won't fix anything. Like, that does not tap into the ultimate goal. So I quite like having that anchor, because it centers you in times when you doubt. Yeah. And you can say, hang on, no, is that still true? Yes, our why is still true. And then you just rest on that.
I mean, that's just such a valid thing. I heard a comment in one of the interviews where a lady in Australia said the following. She said they now have South African friends who've been in Australia for more than 30 years, and they now have starting to have grandkids, and they are able to see their grandkids because they live in the same country, whereas they've left, their parents are still in South Africa. And she said, we had to make that break. Our parents didn't do it. And I think that's what you're saying, because there's a why, it's for your kids. Obviously, people miss their parents and their family and siblings. So I think it's very good to have a very clear picture of where you want to be. So I think that's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think just on that, the last thing, I think, to a large extent, it's quite selfish, right? It's selfish of us to, take the fact that you can see your grandkids, to take that away from our parents is quite selfish to a large extent. I just think that if you think about it, it's, in the way that we saw the country going, it was either my parents missing their grandkids or us missing our grandkids. And as bluntly as that, that's what it came down to, because I couldn't imagine our kids staying, in South Africa. And so we made this decision, exactly like you said, where we said, look, we're going to go over so that one day we can see our grandkids.
And I mean, Maine and Massachusetts must have been pretty cold for you coming from our climate and coming from Barcelona.
So Portland, Maine, obviously is the first time we dealt really with snow shoveling and all of those kind of things.
Yeah, that's the first time. It's the first time I ever saw snow. It was new. It was completely new.
Yeah, feet and feet of snow, but it was still quite novel. Interestingly, though, whilst it's still cold here on Cape Cod in the winter, and we also get snow, it's a lot milder. The difference in that as well is that in Portland, Maine, it'll be freezing cold, but once the snow has fallen, the sun shines. Whereas on the Cape, it's quite, I like to use the word UK-esque. It's very grey in winter. I'm the kind of person that says that the weather doesn't really impact me and I can go on despite of that. But this was the first winter where I felt I actually get why snowbirds exist, because it does get very grey. But it's a wonderful experience and the kids love it. And I personally love the fact that the seasons are so defined. You can really feel like when a different season approaches and it looks different and it feels different. Yeah. In South Africa, it's often quite the same. Not that I would say that that's bad. We love South Africa, obviously, from a weather perspective, but you learn to love it.
Yeah, it's not that bad. I initially thought when we were coming over, like I was petrified of the cold because I will wear shorts. If the sun shines, you put on shorts, right? And so I was petrified about the cold. And to be completely honest, like it was an easier winter than we would have one in South Africa because the homes are set up for it. So the only time you actually get cold is between your house and your car, right? So, whereas in South Africa, it's cold inside the home in winter. You sit under a blanket while watching TV, where in the US or where, if the houses are set up for it, you're sitting in a short and a t-shirt watching TV in the middle of winter. But it's an eye-opener when you walk out and it's minus. I went to Chicago and it was minus 24. I thought I was going to die. I thought I was like this burki, like we're not made for. We're not made for.
No, we're
not made. It goes right through to the middle of your bones.
I can just imagine. So where you are now, is there a South African community or are you pretty much on your own?
Oh, no, I've hunted them down.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
We've actually... There's a group in South Africa called Soweto, which has been founded by a lady called Antoinette Lombard de Ridder. I think she's got quite a long surname. And I initially joined that group and then started posting there. And then there's a massive community in Boston called Ama Boston. But when we arrived on the Cape from Maine, because I was then already integrated into the Soweto group of women, I just posted and said, we're moving to Cape Cod, any Southers around. And we actually have a wonderful community. We're about 6 couples, some of them from Boston, that are really a tight-knit family. The kids have been babysat by them. There's other children. So it's really nice to be part of a South African community. I think it is difficult to break through to locals sometimes. And I think because the US is so big, people from New England are not the same as people from the South, right? And I always say, with a lot of respect, and I've said this to Americans, I say I find that New Englanders are very friendly. Well, they would say they're aloof, but I find them to be friendly, but they're not inviting. They're not like South Africans that meet you and say, oh, you're new in town. I'm inviting you over for a barbecue, and they actually do that. South Africans will say that and do that, and you'll become best friends. Here, it is said, but it's never executed on. So that was quite tricky, and I find that they are very family orientated already. And we're the outsiders, right? Like we're trying to break through. So South Africans just kind of understand where you're coming from. And I always say what I love the best is that you suddenly make friends with people you would have never been friends with in South Africa because
absolutely
suddenly you're birds of a feather, right?
You're basically friends because you're South African,
yes,
not because you are similar or have similar like things you like. It's just like another South African that will get my joke about Julius Malema.
That's the thing. They understand our jokes. Absolutely.
I think one of the awesome things that when we arrived in the US, I mean, you spoke about it earlier, setting up, we couldn't get a car because we didn't have a credit history. We're basically 18-year-olds again. And so arriving, Margaux very soon and quickly was able to kind of find some South Africans. And I think we were there for a week. And then a South African, one of our really good friends now said to us, hey, there's an ice cream shop 2 blocks away from your home. Get us there. And so we walked there. They found us. We met. We had ice cream together. And they offered us their car for a week or two and said, hey, we've got this extra car. We know how bad it is in the beginning. And this is people that we just met. We knew them 20 minutes. And they were like, listen, we can see you guys, or we know what it's like. If you want to use our car for the next 2 weeks until you sort your stuff out, you're welcome to. And I think that's the amazing thing about meeting people, in a different country, because it feels like your people immediately, basically.
Mm. No, well, I did an interview on one of my episodes with a guy called Stephen Pfeiffer. He's the founder of an app called Oorsee.com. I don't know if you've seen that. And Oorsee itself doesn't have that many, about 6,500, I think, that use the app regularly. But there's also a group, South Africans Abroad. I think they've got 81,000 people on there. And Stephen sits in Melbourne, and he's very involved with the South African community. So that's another place, He, for instance, interviewed a lady in Maryland who's a psychologist, and she's set up to help South African women who are battling with the psychology of immigrating. And, it's an amazing support network that you can find when you go out and you sit on the outside and you're an outsider. I think the important thing that you're also saying, you have to put yourself out there. So you're the stranger, you're in their country, but it is very useful to have people around you that you can relate to and so on. So that's great.
We were lucky because we arrived in the World Cup. And so it was easy to spot a South African. They were the unbelievably happy, singing, semi-drunk people, that so you could spot the South Africans from quite far away.
That's very true. No, that was probably the best time to do that. Tell me, and just as on a more psychological note, do you think this journey has changed you as a couple?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We often speak about this, Jan, where you really should not attempt immigration if you're not solid as a couple. I think that is the worst idea that you will ever go through. We've actually, in the MBA, we've seen a lot of couples that have gone and that have subsequently broken up. The MBA, there are other factors involved, obviously, but you really have to like each other. You have to be lovers, good friends. You have to know why you're doing this. And I think there have been numerous times where I've kind of lost my marbles ever so slightly, but Dian being in it with me and understanding me and knowing me deeply and loving me has just always kind of helped and supported. And the times where he went through tough times at work or whatever the case might have been, we were able to support each other. So we have definitely changed. I think on an individual level, we've grown immensely. I can honestly say that I don't think my faith would have been where it is had it not been for the last, about 4 years. So I feel as tough as it might have been in the midst of it all. And maybe I should just give you the reasoning behind it, because this is something that's important for me that I think particularly people who move to the US should know. I don't know whether everyone always does enough homework on the spousal visa front as what you necessarily do, because you just see, okay, Dian got the job, we're going, and you're hustling and you're getting everything ready because we're going. But you don't always dive into what it means for the spouse. So I don't have work authorization, for example. I didn't have work authorization in Barcelona. We then moved on a particular visa to the US, which was a short-term visa, which I had work authorization on for a very short period of time. And now we've moved over to a H-1B visa, and I have 0 rights on it. That, for someone coming from a corporate environment I climbed the ladder at FNB, I had a very big network there. That has really been tough, Jan. And I think it's important to be honest about that, because suddenly figuring out my life in terms of you're now a huisvrouw, a housewife, has been a complete game changer for me. And what I realized in that process is, yes, you need to occupy your mind. I'm a person that wants to be stimulated. There are other ways to do that. I'm currently busy with my master's degree. But I realized in that how much of my identity was actually captured in this Margaux at FNB role, right? And I've done my thing and I've moved and I've shaped. And I can honestly say that today I probably know myself better. I understand myself better. I don't even see myself as Ben and Ina's mom. I see myself as Margaux, and I think that is well defined. That would not have happened if I was caught up in the continued rat race, for example, of staying in South Africa. But it is daunting because not only is it that that I don't have work authorization at the moment, but all the timelines are always very vague. So if you're someone that doesn't deal well with inconsistency and constant change and vagueness, this is really tough for you because we think I will have work authorization in 2 years' time. It might be sooner, it might be later. Who knows? So there's a lot that is up in the air, and that is quite tricky. So I would really encourage people who make the move on the spousal front to make sure that you're comfortable with that and that you can manage that financially as well, because we're on one income on a very expensive piece of land in the US. So that is probably just a bit of a takeaway from my end on the way that we've changed as a couple. I don't know whether you want to add anything.
I think you covered most of it. I think the big thing is that you're quite naked. There's no more cover, right? So meaning that when we were in South Africa, right, I used to play squash on Tuesdays and I used to go golfing on Thursdays. And so it gave you a lot of space from one another, right? So where being in the US, you don't have that anymore. So you need to like the person because it's basically every day, every weekend. You can't go away and say, I'm heartful, I'm going with my friends to go drink a beer. I need a break, right? Because initially there isn't that, right? It's you and your wife. I think Margaux captured it quite well. I think, they always say, steel sharpens steel, and it comes down to going through those really tough times. Kind of, it either breaks you or it makes you. And I'm fortunate and lucky enough to say that, it's been 4 years of really awesome times and 4 years of really tough times. And I feel at the end of it, we have come out at a better place than we did when we started this journey.
I mean, that's so valid. And I think people will benefit a lot from what you're saying. I think, you mentioned the finances. I think it's difficult. A lot of South Africans don't appreciate the cost. Obviously, if you get a good job and you can move with a good job and a good salary, but with ZAR it's pretty difficult. If you have to fund. And you think fortunately, after 5 years, we don't think in those terms anymore. But if you start thinking of what you pay for a cup of coffee, what you do, it can, and when you get visitors from South Africa, and the only thing that we still do cheaper than my mates in Stellenbosch is we drink cheaper wine than them, and we drink very nice wine, the Portuguese wine. So when they say they pay $60 for a bottle of wine, I say, well, I pay 40 Rand for a very drinkable bottle of Portuguese wine. But anyway, what's the funniest thing that happened to you on this journey?
Yeah, I think what was terrifying at the moment, right? So I got an internship in Amsterdam for 3 months whilst I was studying, and it was still, at the back end of COVID, so I needed to get a booster shot to get into Amsterdam. And whilst I was driving home on my small moped, I lost my passport 3 days before I had to fly and start my internship. And we obviously frantically looked everywhere and made a police report and the whole thing. And by hook or by crook, I went on a boys tour to the Sevens rugby tournament in Spain, and we got, I don't know if I can say, we got horribly drunk in the beer tent. And then the next moment, this small lady in like a Sesotho hat standing next to me, and it was the ambassador to Spain. And so she saw us, and she saw me and my two mates that had South African shirts or something on, and she asked if she could take a photo with us, and then asked me to send it to her. So I had her number, and so when this thing happened, I phoned her at, I think, 10:15 at night, and I said, "Look, I don't know if this is right or wrong. I don't know, but you're going to need to help me now, right?" And she did. She jumped in. She sent me the number of the head of the embassy. I was able to get an appointment with them. The problem was getting a passport in Europe, and this it takes 4 to 6 months to get it. But they were able to get me an emergency passport for a day to fly back to South Africa, where I went to right above Pretoria. I went to this small town, got a passport in 4 days. There might have been a brown envelope involved. But I was back in Europe in 6 days' time, and something that was, and the weirdest thing of all was, I left for South Africa, and a day after I left, it was a day before I would fly back to South Africa, we got a knock on the door, and it was the post office. And so they gave us a package, and somebody had picked up, I had like a pouch with my passports, my IDs, everything in there. And they had they put it in a post box, and they found my details from my residency card. And they sent it back to us, right? So I got my passport, everything back. The only bad thing is because of that emergency passport, they had cancelled all of those passports, so it didn't help me whatsoever. So I go back to South Africa. But I think that was probably
that is something that has really struck me throughout our journey in Barcelona and in the US, is the sense of how it should be. Dian lost his passport. Someone found it. They gave it to the police. They gave it back to him. The other time, he drove over his phone with his scooter or something, or he lost his phone out of his scooter as well. And I got a call from a police woman, and she said, I picked up this phone. I was like, oh, it's my husband's phone. They returned the phone to us. When we stayed in Portland, Maine, one evening, we had to open the trunk, and Nina's one snow boot fell out. And I posted on the South Portland group, we lost one of my daughter's snow boots. It's a pink snow boot, la-di-da-di-da. Someone said, oh, I saw that. I put it on the fence. Drove back a day later, it was left on the fence. I think that kind of feeling of how people should be towards each other. Everyone has what they should have, and they're happy with what they have. They don't take from each other. They just respect each other's things. And there's the sense of kindness of what is yours, I return to you. That is something that I'm continuously in awe of, and that I appreciate greatly, because that's the way we should live.
Absolutely. And I mean, add to that this sense of security that after 5 years, we're still not used to it. We're still not used to seeing women running on their own or walking on the beach, or, being outside in the dark. But I think that's fantastic. Think about South Africa. If you could ship something today that would make your life better, what would that be from South Africa?
I would like to ship my old domestic worker. I would love either for her or my grandma to come over. I think it's like we don't know. Cleaning a house has been probably the biggest thing for us to get used to, right? Because you grow up with that luxury, and I'm not saying everyone in South Africa has that, but it's something that we had, right? And so even though I was still responsible for making my bed in the morning, but like I never ironed. I think the first time I ever washed my own clothing was when Margaux went back to South Africa. I can still remember phoning her and saying, "Do you wash the shower?"
Yeah.
And she said, "Yes, of course." And I said, I thought they just wash it. I thought it just washes itself because it's always just clean, right?
He was perplexed about the shower window that the buildup.
Yeah, it got and so like if we can just those small luxuries of having somebody come in and do the ironing and do the washing, because at the moment, if you try and get that, whether that's in Europe or in the US, like you're paying $25 an hour for somebody to come in, and they come in for 4 hours, and you say to them, will you please do XYZ? If there's anything outside of that XYZ, they don't do it. They'll clean right around a cup if you leave it on the coffee table.
No, that's very true. We're very fortunate here. Minimum wage in Portugal is quite a lot lower. So we get a lady once every 2 weeks, but she's almost become a friend, because she always brings eggs and veggies from the farm. They live on a farm, and she's fairly young, but she's beautiful, and she comes in and works for about 2.5 hours every 2 weeks. But for the rest, we deal with it ourselves. You kind of, I guess, you get used to it. But I agree with you. On the other hand, if you say that, you'll say the one thing you don't want to import is a car guard, because
No.
If I never see one of those again, I'll be happy.
No, I mean, we miss stuff from South Africa. I wouldn't say that I don't necessarily miss South Africa that much. I miss elements of South Africa. I miss that. I think the biggest thing that I miss is the South African sense of humor. Like, it is unbelievably unique. And we were lucky where, whilst I was studying, we had 78 different nationalities that was in my class with me, right? So I got to know people from Kazakhstan and Mongolia, and South Africans have a really unique sense of humor and way of looking at things. Sometimes it's a bit dark, but it's I miss that.
I agree with you.
I also don't think, like, if I had to think now, there's nothing that I would bring over. had you asked me about a year ago, I would have said my dogs, and we have brought the dogs over. So there honestly isn't, other than ACC and Kuren's I see that gets flown every time a granny visits.
Zambak.
Well, an Ina Parman soap, but you can get that on Amazon.
Yeah.
We have a South African shop, so we get a lot of stuff, but not the meds. But everybody who comes over, because I've got bad knees, they always bring Cataflam.
Ja, ons het ook Dictaflam. Ons bring by the boatload.
You remember there was a lady whose daughter was in Helpmekaar. She always said that Cataflam helps for poverty as well, and I've started to believe that.
Yeah.
That's actually very funny. No, I think, I was going to say the last question is, what would you tell another South African couple that would be thinking of leaving? I think you've answered a lot of that. It's that you've got to really, really like and trust each other and be on the same page. I think for me, the one thing that stands out is how important that why is for you, because I've said it in many of these discussions, is that I believe you can't look over your shoulder and say, if it doesn't work, I'll go back, because that's a very bad attitude to have. So I think that why for me is great to come out of this. But is there anything else? Obviously, finance, money is important. Is there anything else that you would advise somebody who's thinking of leaving?
Mine would honestly just be to understand exactly what your visa rules and regulations would be that would apply to both visa holders, especially if the one is on a spousal visa, because I think that is a massive game changer. And I don't think enough research is done about that. That would be mine.
Yeah. I mean, I think you covered most of it, Jan. I think, you said it earlier, like for us, it was very much jumping in with both feet. Like we sold everything. There was no plan B to come back if stuff got tough. Right? Because stuff I think, if you still have your house and you still have, your bank accounts and everything active on that side, it could be easier when times are really tough just to say, screw it, we're going back, this is too tough, right? And as you said, because of our why, we knew why we wanted to be here, and we saw long-term, we saw really quickly, the absolute advantage we can give our kids if they have that stupid blue passport, right? It's an amazing opportunity for them. So I think that's the big thing, is jump in with both feet. I think the other thing is making sure that, you understand and accept the fact that it is going to be different. It's not what you see on TV. It is different. Everything from the way that the health industry works, the way that, you interact with the locals here. I think the one thing about the US that was great for us is I know it doesn't sound that way on the news, but they are quite welcoming to immigrants, right? Where, if you bring a good skill and a good attitude and a will to work to the US, like they are super open. Most of the people that I've spoken to have said, we're so glad you guys are here. We desperately need people to work and to add value to the society. I mean, I'm coaching one of the rugby teams on the Cape, and I mean, the people have been amazing, right? And I think that was, in Europe, it did feel a bit different in that way, where, I don't know, it felt like the Europeans were very much us, we are Portuguese, or we are Spanish, or we are, what was it, Netherlanders? Dutch, sorry. And you're an immigrant. And I have, with a lot of my friends, spoken, and it's still that case, even if you've lived there for 5, 6, 7, 8 years and have residency, right? And so that was the big thing, understanding that, it's not your people, and it won't be, but you can integrate into a society, and it could be amazing.
No, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your journey via Barcelona into America. It's just been a really, really interesting and open conversation. And I just have to say thank you, and thanks for adding value to the show.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. And I think this would have been valuable if we've had something before we moved. So hopefully the next guys can listen to this podcast and gain an insight here or there, and be better prepared when they come over.
Well, if you enjoyed my discussion with Margaux and Dian and would like to hear more about experiences of South Africans who have left for a better future, why not subscribe on your favorite platform? If you would like to share your own story, contact us on relocatedSouthAfrican@gmail.com. Until next time.